It's such a privilege to work with the World Music Institute and to be a part of this exciting program. And we're going to dive right in. First of all, I'm really curious what it feels like to be wearing the interviewee hat and I wearing the interviewer hat. What does that feel like, Gianluca? I don't think we've done that very much.
No, it's
Didn't you
it's
interview me once?
I did, yeah. We're actually switching. I did it in Cuba. I interviewed you. Yeah, it's terrifying. Actually, I've not done this really very much before.
I mean,
So
if you want the whole switch, you can come here and play my piano.
oh, I'd love to. Yeah, how hard could it be, right?
Just move your fingers around. That's what people say. How hard could it be playing the conga, the cajon? It's just moving your hands up and down, right? But it's not that simple, is it? You found out some really really profound things about this music that some people call folkloric, and it's really profound and complex. I mean, the music of Changüí is anything but simple. But it's can you tell us a little bit about what Changüí is, how you see it, how you participate in, it, why spend years of your life devoted to this incredible rich tapestry?
Um. Well, wow, but that would probably take the whole hour up. It was really odd. I was doing my first ever NPR piece was on Cuban organilleros. There's an organ grinding tradition in the Granma region of Cuba, it's southeastern-ish. And so I was out there in about 2005, and I was in Manzanillo, going to go on the air, on Radio Manzanillo, and Fidel Castro was doing one of his speeches. And Fidel Castro's speeches are quite famous for being for being quite freewheeling. And while we were waiting to go on, we just started to listen to music, and someone pulled out a cassette tape of traditional Changüí and put it on. And so a lot of Cuban music, well, a lot of Latin music, a lot of Cuban music, as you know, is on the clave, the 5-stroke rhythm, right? And a lot of Cuban and Latin music is on straight time. Generally, I'm talking generally. And what they had put on was like nothing I had ever heard before. It was not on the clave, and it was not on straight time. It was all syncopated. And so it swung all over the place, and it was really bizarre rhythms. It was all string instruments with this very weird sound, which I later found out to be a marimbola. And it was sort of really raggly-taggly. It was sort of loose, but not sloppy. And it was really hip, and no one could really, everyone said, well, it's Changüí, but no one really knew anything about it. And that was, I guess it's now 17 or 18 years ago now. And I kept asking people, in the rest of my trip, I kept asking people about Changüí. And everyone was referring me to Elio Reve, Elito Reve, and Los Van Van, who are what is considered Changüí today. And they're fantastic, and they're definitely Changüí, and they're really great. But it's not what I heard. And they're sort of progressive. They're progressive, and it's sort of like if I had heard Robert Johnson, and I was asking about this blues music, and they were telling me about the Allman Brothers or the Rolling Stones or the modern urban side, and no one. So for years, this bee stuck in my bonnet. No one could really tell me much about it. And I would keep asking people, and they would refer me to Los Van Van. And there's a few other people that that came up in conversation that again wasn't the traditional stuff I had heard. So anyway, this piece sort of was in my bonnet for all these years. In 2016, Arturo, you come into this too, so you're partly to blame. Part of this is your fault.
Stuff.
Yeah, well, you took your, Gabby mentioned your father, Chico Farrell, who passed away in exile, and he wanted to be repatriated. And you did that in 2016. My partner at the time, Kate Paler, was working with ALJA, Afro Latin Jazz Alliance. And we came out and met you in Havana. It was a beautiful week. It was really very, very moving and wonderful. And, you know, anyone that's known you for 10 minutes knows that you can't stop playing the piano. So you played a lot out there. You played with various people out there, and you did a performance with someone that played on your Cuban record, the album that you recorded in Cuba.
Cuba, the conversation
Yeah, right. Cuba, the
continues.
conversation continues. It was a phenomenal album, and Koto played with you one evening there. And Koto is a wonderful tres player. You know, the tres is Cuba's only it's sort of national instrument, the 3 double string guitar. And and Koto is not really a Changüí player, but he comes from Changüí, he comes from Guantánamo, he's born into Changüí. And you know, there's that moment where the abstract comes out of the abstract and sort of presents, and at that moment it was like, oh wow, Changüí, he knows Changüí. And it's sort of, and that's sort of what started the whole thing off, really. Then I went out to Guantánamo and just wanted to find out for myself. Wasn't really that much written about it, really.
There's a couple things I'd love to get into weeds with you about. You mentioned, because you mentioned that this is a very, very special music. It's not clave based. And I wonder if you just explain, some folks don't know what clave is, but in addition to it not being clave based, it's very site specific to the instrumentation. And some folks don't know what a marimbola is, and they don't understand the guitars that are involved and the instrumentation of Changüí. And then the thing that I'm really interested in that you touch upon is this interlayering of rhythms that really comes together to make, it's not typical Afro-Cuban music in the sense that it's not a mambo or cha-cha-cha or a tumbao. And I wonder if you'd elaborate on why this interplay of layers in Changüí is so sacred and mystifying. I wish you'd talk a little bit about that. And then I also wonder if you talk about any other musical traditions that are in Guantánamo.
Yeah. So the layering of it, later on, maybe I'll compare it a little bit to blues music, but you know, it comes out of Changüí, comes out of the plantations, in the rural plantations, and in the mid 1800s it started, and a tres player would start riffing, grinding out riffs, and everyone in the community would pick up instruments, whatever was lying around in the house, to make instruments. So initially there was no real instrumentation. It was just whatever was lying around. A machete with a sharpening file might be the guayo. Someone might blow into a bottle. The bass sound would probably might have been 2 bamboo trunks hidden against the ground to make a bassy sound. They might not even have had bongos. It might have been the back of a chair. But anyway, or a cow's jaw for a maracas or a gourd or something. So there was no real instrumentation. It got codified in Changüí, moved, you know, as Changuizeros started to move into the city in the 1900s. It started to, someone just post-war decided, a great composer, Rafael Incarte Brioso, decided to form a group. He headhunted, he suggested a group to form an actual group. And that group was Changüí, Grupo Changüí de Guantánamo. And they're still around today, not the original formation. And then it got codified as that the instrumentation got codified. Bongos, marimbola, tres, and the marimbola is like a big imbira. If you take a cajon and you put sort of metal prongs on it and pluck them like a marimbola, that would like a mbira, that would be a that would be a marimba. And that would be the bass sound and the bongos and the tres. And those three instruments sort of lock together and solo around each other. And then the guayo and the maracas accompany them. So when someone calls a break, Changüí's kind of set up like a pop song. It's sort of like dance music. So there's a first verse to set it up. And then the chorus kicks in and it's call and response from there on in. And because it's homemade music, it's sort of an open circle. If anyone has a call, there's a response. And in the old days, it would have been the tres player coming up with the verses. And now it's usually the guayo player that comes up with the verses. But anyway, the chorus might go on forever for who knows where, as long as anyone's coming up with calls. There's going to be a response for people dancing and joining in the Changüí. So these three instruments, the bongo, the tres, and the marimba, sort of weave around each other. And at a certain point, one will solo, and those three lock into each other. I don't know if I'm explaining it right. It's
no, really I think you're doing a great job. And as a matter of fact, it's really interesting to me because the bongo típico, I think is what it's called. And that sometimes the cajon is added to it. The marimbula is like a big thumb piano. Imagine a kalimba, but only a big bass one that you sit on top of most of the time. And then of course the tres is used throughout Cuba, as you mentioned, but it's used in a very specific way in the music of Changüí. I think that what's fascinating again is that it's not necessarily clave based at all. It doesn't have to do, but something that I also think is interesting is you'll find a version of all of these instruments, especially the marimba, throughout Latin America and throughout Africa. And the marimba has also been found on the coast of Veracruz in the music of Son Jarocho, which to me is very interestingly similar to the music of Changüí. And as a matter of fact, I think there's a historical precedence for that. And I have to tell you that I took Tacho Utrera, who is a jarana master, to Havana. And we were asked to give a presentation at the Casa de las Americas of Son Jarocho music. And this is an incredible story. And we actually joined up Coto with Tacho Utrera, and they literally started jamming like they'd been playing together the whole lives. And so in some ways, I see a connection between the music of Son Jarocho and the music of Changüí. Certainly it's based on the same layering of patterns of rhythms. It isn't necessarily clave based, but is very striated, very, very many different things taking place at once. I wonder if you talk about that at all, if you know of any precedents to think of the Son Jarocho music as being related to Changüí.
Oh, not really. This is ethnomusicologist territory, and I'm going to step back from that one because there's people that really know what they're talking about it, and I'm more generalist. I can say that my way into it, what really grabbed me about it was that I hear the Jarocho music. My way into it a lot was, as someone that spent a long time on roots music, and particularly American roots music, right? And particularly pre-war blues music from the Mississippi Delta and that region. I hear a lot of similarities with that. So, like the timeline is the same. It's syncopated. It's call and response. It's riff bass. It comes out of the plantations. It moves into the cities, and then it sort of goes out into the rest of the world and does its own thing. And my way into Changüí was through that. So I hear all sorts of things in Changüí, and I hear all sorts of connections. I also hear, it might sound strange, I hear as much Mississippi Fred McDowell as I do, say, Jorocho or Buena Vista Social Club, because of the syncopation, call and response, the riffs, you know, and the dance aspect to it.
Would you say there's any relationship between Changüí and La Tumba Francesa?
Yes, yes, very much so.
Can you explain a little bit about what La Tumba Francesa is? I'll tell you, that freaked me out. One of the first times I went to Cuba, one of the very first times that I went to Cuba, and you and I have been going back and forth to Cuba for 20 years. One of the first times I went to Guantánamo, and I saw La Tumba Francesa, and I saw what is decidedly Afro-based rhythmic and performance practice, complete with the marimbula, and performed by people in French colonial clothing. And it just blew me away, because if you talk about the synchronicity of culture, if you talk about the migratory power of music, there's nothing quite like seeing it in play in the Tumba Francesa or in Changüí or for that matter in the Mardi Gras Indians.
Yeah, you see, the Tumba Francesa is a whole mix of French and very, very African rhythms. And you know, what you said is really interesting, because through music, you really see the whole history of migration of the world. So, you know, in Tumba Francesa, for example, you have African rhythms, you have French colonial clothing, you have sort of ballroom dancing, you know, a whole mission, you know, there's a whole history there in a nutshell. You don't have to read that many books, you can just see it. If you take Changüí, for example, you know, you hear African rhythms, you hear a Cuban tres guitar, you hear maracas, which is sort of Taino maracas. You hear sort of different elements of Cuban history in song. You hear these melodies that, you know, are sort of possibly Muslim via Spain, that sort of snowballed through, well, in a tropical climate, snowball's probably not the right word, but you know, that sort of, that swirled around Cuba and connected with other cultures that were going through Cuba. You really can sort of see the whole history in a nutshell. You know, we can read books about migration and about the whole history of a country, but when we listen to the music, we hear it firsthand. You know, the French. Oh, sorry, I don't mean to.
No, I was just going to say Ned Sublette makes this point beautifully in his book Cuba and its Music, and he talks very literally about how the exchange of slaves between the tip of Spain and the tip of Africa and moving into Western Africa, and the influence of the oud, the Middle Eastern stringed instrument, and all of that, and the horrifying event called the slave trade was brought to what we call the New World, but quite frankly, there were people here before we got them. But all of this is proof to me that in some ways, and I would say this is very true of Changüí, because it is so deeply ingrained in the flavor of Guantánamo. All these all these global migratory influences, yet there's nothing more Cuban than Changüí. You know, and it shows me that the same thing I found this with Son Jarocho. The more you embrace the sources, the less that you don't dilute. You actually become more yourself. You become more a reflection of your people and your community, and that should speak against, you know, people who are anti-migratory.
You know, I'm glad you brought Ned Sublet's book up, because everyone should read. It's amazing. I mean, there's hundreds of pages. I'm going to paraphrase it in a couple of short sentences, but he spends the first 4 chapters or 5 chapters talking about the history of migration through music and through how the musical instruments travel. And when you read those, I think anyone that has fears about immigration or migration should read those chapters, and all their fears will just die away immediately. The history of the world can be heard through its music. And to sort of a little bit circle back to your first question, I find roots music particularly, and this is true of all roots music in any part of the world, but I'm going to talk about sort of Changüí or Cuban roots music, and that, roots, history and history books tell us about life from the top down, the kings, the queens, the economy, and the captains and the generals and all this. But it's actually, it's the music, and particularly the roots music, that tell us about history from the bottom up. The French wine drinkers use the term terroir, where sommeliers can taste a glass of wine and they can tell you everything about that region, the climate, the rock formation, the topography, the flora, the fauna, the weather patterns. And roots music has that same purpose. And in Changüí, for example, Guantánamo region is the far east part of Cuba. And we know that it was sugarcane, and we know that it was coffee. And we know that those two commodities sort of powered the whole Caribbean and the whole world. But the sugar and the coffee didn't sort of jump on the ships by themselves. Bloody hands and broken backs put them on those ships. And those they're the invisible people. We don't know about them. They're not in the book. But when we listen to the roots music and when we listen to Changüí, we hear their stories. They were there. This is my story. Those people, the hands and the backs, they had a family, they had a mother, they had a sister, they had a community, they ate, they danced, they had songs. And you can hear those songs in Changüí, and any roots music, really. So I'm quite profoundly affected by roots music in that. And that was one of my also draws into Changüí, to answer your first question again.
No, I think that's a great answer. And I think, it's funny. There's a couple things I want to ask you about, because the reality is that most of the world makes music in a communal setting. The reality is most of the planet Earth makes music. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a highfalutin performer. People gather up. They pick up their instruments. They dance their feet. They make some mole with chicken, and they just sit down and start performing. This is such the contradiction is to think of music as the purview of the concert hall or the jazz club, or the setting where a docile group of people sit in front of it doesn't work that way. Now, I wonder if you talk a little bit about the fact that this is actually, Changüí is the same way that the pearl divers in Kuwait made music, and the same way that, as we said before, it's on Jarocho, but this is really the way music is made. And for me, what you said that was beautiful is this roots music has as much information, in fact, maybe more than the music that is written by the winners, the music that is written by the history writers. So maybe you can talk about community and the way that the rest of the world makes music, and why it's so important, why it's so sacred to protect and uphold this beautiful way of making music.
Yeah, well, you said something. Can I read a little bit about what you said? Because you've known this forever, and I've sort of figured it out quite recently. Can I read a little bit about what you wrote on the introduction? It was so beautiful, and I'll build on that, because you said something in 4 lines that was just beautiful. But it was about the fact that and I have to say, you wrote an introduction for this project that actually just made my knees buckle. It was so well written, and I'm so glad you're not.
Thank you, Gianluca. That's very, very wonderful. Oh, no, really, I really cared, and I do care, and this is part of my life.
No, it was beautiful, but you were you were saying that about the power of music. You say, imagine that you can also you can take this tangible reality, and having handled it, smoothing out the rough patches, washing, painting, or doing what you want with it, if you could then share it with anyone or everyone that you choose to, imagine that by sharing it, not only does it dilute or spread thin, it actually grows the more you give it away. The more you share it, the more you have of it. And that kind of puts it in a nutshell, but I have sort of, I realized that maybe I'd been listening to music all wrong, because we listen to music as art music. Bob Kester, or I do, Bob Kester of Delmark Records used to used to say art music and folk music, and I kind of knew what he meant when he said that. And we kind of confuse folk music as folk music, the genre. And but you know, we're used to seeing music played in a straight line, right? Behind closed doors. So, you know, I hear a guitar string 2 years after it's plucked. A piece of music is often conceived of behind closed doors. It's rehearsed behind closed doors. It's recorded behind closed doors. And then it's rehearsed again behind closed doors, so people can then take it around the world and perform it to people behind closed doors. And it's performed in a straight line to people looking at them in a straight line. And of course, that's quite a modern, I guess that's what Bob Kester meant by art music. And that's quite a modern phenomenon. There was a time when that did not exist, when there was no such thing as indoor music, really. It was all outdoors. This idea of playing music where no one heard it didn't exist. And, you know, musicians, as you know, when they sit around and play music in an informal setting, the last thing they do is sit in a straight line. They all sit in the same way, either in a circle or a horseshoe shape. And, you know, with Changüí, for example, you know, it's always like that. It's an open circle and anyone can join in. It's a community. It's a sort of, in the case of Changüí, it's sort of a communal event. It's a barn raising, really. It's how I guess all roots music, it's how communities gathered, how communities bonded, how they got together. All roots music comes with food, comes with dance, comes with its characters, comes with its customs. You know,
in that sense, it's also really different from a lot of religious music. This is it. Correct me if I'm wrong, by the way. I may be stretching here. Another very important feature of Changüí is that it's not necessarily, if ever, religious music. Yeah, Afro-Yoruban religious music. It can refer to it, but more often than not, it's a declamatory kind of improvisatory statement on what's happening in life right now.
Yeah. Well, a lot of Changüí's eras come out of the Palo or the Yoruba tradition, but it's not necessarily religious music per se. No, it's dance music. It's a community music. It's the, you know, Changüí is a culture. It's about the food. It's about the dance. It's about the community. When everyone that participates in a Changüí is a Changuizero, and a Changuizero or a Changuizera is also the person that cooks the food, also the person that dances, also the person that contributes. You know, Changüís used to last for 3 days back in the day, with different musicians rotating in and out. It would move from house to house. So it was I suppose the equivalent of, if we were in Silicon Valley, we might say open source software, where everyone can bring something to it and nip and tuck it. And Changüí is also very modern too. It does not sound like old traditional music. You know, Benjamin Lapidus wrote an essay for the collection, and Benjamin Lapidus wrote a wonderful book on Changüí, where he really breaks down, you know, the history of every instrument and and everything really. And he is a musician and an ethnomusicologist, so he can really break this down properly. But you know, he pointed out the fact that one of the most traditional sounding bands in the collection, Popoi Su Changüí, and Popo is in his late 60s now. He just retired from cutting sugarcane. And he sings a type of Changüí that he heard his grandparents sing as a boy. So if you follow the timeline, my maths is terrible, but it's very old. But he sings a song about the Copenhagen, about climate change and the Copenhagen Climate Summit. So
Beautiful.
so there you have it. You know, it's traditional, modern traditional music, I guess.
You bring up an interesting point, because I've noticed this in a lot of the traditions that I've seen that resemble Changüí and Son Jarocho, and what it's very strange, because you talked about the whole community being involved and the whole you know, and there being much cooking and much dancing and much playing and much many chickens running around and kids running around, and I wonder, like, because I've seen this and I've noticed it, and it's actually, it doesn't exclude women, but to some degree, you don't see a lot of women practitioners in any of these things. And I don't know if that's true in Changüí or not. They're certainly welcome, but I wonder if you talk a little bit about women in Changüí and what the mores are in that.
Yeah, well, there's an all-women band on the collection, Las Flores del Changüí, and who were really wonderful. No, there are women in Changüí, and there have been women musicians in Changüí. You know, I'd have to say no parent. Okay, so Koto, who we talked about at the beginning, the tres player that performed on your album, A Conversation Continues, and he took me to Rafaela, who is the first song on the collection. Starts off with "Dice Cambron que hay un Changüí en Yateras." Cambron says there's going to be a Changüí in Yateras, which is a region in the mountains of Guantánamo. And Cambron was a sort of now legendary Changüizero for Grupo Changüí de Guantánamo, who was the first official Changüí group. And Koto took me to meet his daughter in Havana, who used to play Changüí, but she had to wait. As famous as Cambron was, and as much of a Changüizero as Cambron was, she had to wait till he passed away before playing Changüí. He did not want her to play Changüí, because, and a lot of parents didn't really want their sons playing it either, because it was a real rough and tumble life. I mean, it's quite a rock and roll life. You know, it's partying, it's drinking, it's staying awake for 3 days, it's rambling around the countryside. But that said, there are many women in Changüí and women musicians. Popo, who I'd mentioned earlier, who just retired, who heads Popoi Su Changüí, learned to play Changüí from his mother, who was a tres player. Floridia in Las Flores del Changüí, the all-female group that I recorded in Guantánamo, learned to play from her grandmother, the tres. So, and also Las Flores del Changüí aren't the first all-female Cuban, all-female Changüí group. So there have been female Changüí musicians. And I would have to say this, that there are a couple of songs on the collection about Changüizeras, and to be a Changüizero or Changüizera, because it's a holistic culture, it's not just about the musicians. The people, the women who open their homes to a 3-day Changüí are considered are extremely highly respected as almost like patrons of the arts. their songs about them. There's 2 songs on the collection about La Chacona and who throws Changüíes along her back streets on the outskirts of Guantánamo City.
It's funny. It's not necessarily like a misogynism, but I know from being Cuban myself.
Yeah.
That, in my opinion, Cuban society is very matriarchal, and frequently the seat of power is in the grandmother or the or and so I find it really interesting that so many times when you come upon a scene of musicians hanging out and playing in the park, they're almost invariably men. So I don't think it's a gesture, it's an intentional gesture. I just I think it's a and it's funny. There's a wonderful question here which I'd love to address, and it's from an anonymous attendee who says,
Sure.
did you get any resistance from the performers when you first approached them to record these sessions?
No, none actually. No. On the contrary, when I went out there, I did not want to. The last thing I didn't actually go out there to make a record. Initially, I really went out to sort of. I thought I was doing at the time a 5-minute or an 8-minute NPR piece, perhaps on spec. Guantánamo, not just the Bay, something like that. And so it happened really organically. It was Steve Rosenthal who, he restored many Alan Lomax's recordings and Errol Garner's archives, etc. Anyway, it started off not as a musical project, and then halfway through it, after several recordings, it was obviously going to be a musical project. So all the musicians took a sudden turn with me. They became my friends very quickly. They became my family very quickly. And the nature of Changüí is very welcoming. So I was very conscious of the fact that I was not of the culture. But no, I didn't get resistance at all. They became really my co-conspirators in many ways. Everyone got their own music recorded on thumb drives. I've kept them involved in every step of the process. So no, very, very welcoming. I have to say, I'm really extremely grateful and quite humbled by the whole experience.
It's interesting. I definitely know that a lot of that has to do with your personality, Gianluca, because you're such a warm and gracious human being that you just bring a lot of light into any room that you inhabit. That's the truth. I'm not just saying that, but I can't imagine anyone. But sometimes in these settings, people get proprietary. Like this is our thing, and you're gonna come in, and we don't want to. I mean, I heard this in relation to our project in Tijuana. We don't want outsiders in, and this music that we're doing is for our people, and blah blah blah. And in a way, it's so contrary to the idea of Changüí or San Rocho to be proprietary. The whole point of Changüí, the whole point of Son Jarocho is to invite everyone in, regardless of where you come from.
No, absolutely. I thought, that's absolutely correct. I didn't encounter any of it, and I was really very grateful. They were really my co-conspirators in the whole process, and actually, I keep them in touch. Now they're my family. With the younger Changüizeros, I know their parents and grandparents. With the older Changüizeros, I know their kids and grandkids now. And so I keep them in touch. They know about tonight too. So, there's a daisy chain of information that I send, because only a few of them have cell phones. But very welcoming generally. And actually, they asked me, I'll be going to there's a Changüí festival in June, late June. And they asked me to present the project out there. So
that's incredible. That's incredible. You must be so proud, man. We finally got to screen Fandango at the Wall in Tijuana. and it was
Oh,
it was unbelievable, man. It was the first time I'd seen the film. If the first time I saw it on a screen, and it was actually one of the first times I saw a movie in 2 years. And we're sitting there in Tijuana with the people of Tijuana, and we showed this film. There were tears, man. People started crying. It was
oh, wow.
yeah. A couple of yeah, a couple other things that occur to me, and this is you don't have to comment to this because I know you're apolitical, but
Oh.
started
See?
some. There's Arturo starting some stuff, man. Um,
No, you can start. I love it.
well, one of the things that makes people protective of their environments is a socioeconomic quadrant too. This is not the landed gentry part of Cuba. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a, yeah, it's sort of like the equivalent of that's sort of another parallel with Mississippi blues, I guess, you know. I was mentioning the way I connected it with Mississippi blues as much.
Or the Gullah people as well.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, yeah, because it's so Eastern Cuba is sort of the like the deep South in America. It's considered sort of you know, every country has a north-south divide. Italy, America, obviously. In Cuba, it's the east-west divide, and people in Havana, I hate, you know, Habaneros consider Orientales, people in the Oriente region of Cuba, sort of rather sort of hickish, and they refer to it as Palestina in the Havana side, like Palestine. It's out there. It's yeah, it's really agricultural region. It's sort of a very poor region. It doesn't rain much. The cows are really, really thin right now. It's raining even less than ever. So so yeah, on a social economic level, it is probably the poorest region in of an already not particularly well-heeled country. Um, yeah,
Well,
uh,
Santiago del Oriente,
yeah,
Palma Soriano, Guantánamo. These are places that are often referred to as the real Cuba, and
yeah.
I'm sure these are places that of course the enslaved were first brought to, and so
Mhm.
there's a very very strong African presence in that part of Cuba, and I'm sure
Mhm.
that all goes to play. Of course, Havana might as well be New York in
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
terms of
yeah.
and very often the pace of life. Would you say that the pace of life in Havana and the pace of life in Guantanamo helps flavor the music of either reality?
Yes. Well, I yes, I would say that. I would say actually like to add another thing that it's said. I've heard it said. It has been said a few times that in Cuba things start east and go west. So east would be Guantanamo around that region, the Oriente region, say from Santiago de Cuba eastwards, right to Barat, to the tip of Punta de Maisi. So, so a lot of what ends up in Havana starts on the far east. So like the raw materials. So Havana might be sort of the face of Cuba, and but maybe the Oriente would be the heart of Cuba. Now, I'm going to also put in a case, as Ned Sublette would never forgive me if I didn't. Matanzas also has a heavy hand in being a source of a lot of Cuba. So so yeah, it has been said that things in Cuba start east and move west. So a lot of the building blocks, I suppose. This is also, we're getting into ethnomusicology territory, which I'm going to just stop as I get to that line.
Yeah, I'm
Not
scared. I'm scared of that border myself. I got to tell you.
we'll get
There,
along just
there's a
fine.
statue. There's in near the cathedral of Our Lady of Cobre. There's a statue called the La Estatua del Cimarron. It's by Alberto Lascai, and it literally overlooks a gully, a bay that used to run redwood the blood of the enslaved. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that yes, that's a very powerful part of the narrative of Santiago and regions there. And another very powerful part of the narrative in Santiago and its regions is the presence of real indigenous peoples, the Siboney, the Taino. And I wonder if you can comment to did any of that make it into the music?
In the collection, so no, well, almost. So that was one of the, I had to pace the floor quite. What happened was over the 2.5-year period, I had recorded something like 250 tracks with about 25 groups. So it was like, oh, wow, this is like a 37 CD box right now. So to narrow it down, I decided to concentrate on the, so Changüí, Nengon and Kiriba are kind of interconnected. And Nengon and Kiriba is sort of more towards, now I'm generalizing, right? I'm not getting ethnomusicology territory, so I'm generalizing, but the further east you go to Maisi and Baracoa, the less Afro on the dial it is, and the slightly more Caribbean flavored Indios on the dial you go. It slightly has a slightly different lilt the closer you go to Baracoa and Maisi. And so I used to, for the purposes of narrowing it down, I stuck to the sort of Afro-rooted rhythmic stuff that's more around Guantánamo City. So what you hear in the box is sort of around, say, of a 20-mile or 30-mile region around Guantánamo City. And the further east you go, the slightly more Caribbean lilt that you can hear in the music. It's still Changüí, it's Nengon, Kiriba. It just has a different lilt.
It's funny because I remember going to that region, Palma Soriano, which is far from Guantanamo, and finding myself coming upon an encampment of Haitian Cubans.
Yeah,
in the middle of the woods, and fully voodoo and Afro Yoruba. Incredible mixtures of this, just what you said, the Caribbean. There's people, they don't realize that, a lot of folks don't realize that Cuba is many places and many peoples and many things. And one of the most beautiful things about Cuba is coming upon someone in the street and looking at them and not realizing that they are many people, many people's wedding face.
No, it really, it really is. And Haiti actually has a lot to do with that identity as well. Actually,
how so?
You were because of after the Haitian Revolution, they all came in from Haiti. That's how a lot of the coffee plantation came over in there. So a lot of those rhythms are sort of from the Haitian roots as well.
It's brilliant. I would encourage all of our listeners and viewers to please, if you have a question, please, I would encourage you to put it in the Q&A. And I an emotionally charged question for you. Seeing the situation that Cuba is under economically, do you have any thoughts about the information that we get about life down there, the information they get about us, and how much of it is politically manipulated? And I mean, this is kind of a charged question, I admit, but I really, I don't see. I see the suffering, I see the heartache, I see the poverty. I don't see that ideological divide. I don't think that can you speak to any of that if I've just gone completely overboard?
No, it's fine. Well, I haven't been there like anyone else for close to 3 years, so I can't speak to it right, what it is there on the ground. So I'm not really sure I have a full answer. I mean, oddly enough, I find Cubans a lot better informed than Americans, actually.
A lot better educated, maybe.
Yes, sorry, that's a terrible thing to say,
No,
but
it's not a terrible thing to say. I mean, for whatever you think of the revolution, pro or con,
yeah,
every human being in Cuba is entitled to and deserves and gets an education.
yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they're super well informed. I would have to say one thing though about the sort of overheated. Well, you've traveled all through Cuba and right, Arturo, and I've just noticed that a lot of the narrative about Cuba is mainly from Americans or Cuban Americans, which are still Americans. So once you get past the camera crews in Havana, and you just get out into regular Cuba, just sort of on the railroad tracks and the farms and whatnot. It's kind of just like any other country. Some Cubans do, some Cubans don't, some like, some don't like, and I just sort of wish people would go out there more and listen to that side of the story rather than the US side of the story. And not being Cuban, I can't really comment on that. And not having lived there properly, I can't really comment on that
no,
anymore.
I think that's a really intelligent way to say people should ask for permission to travel to Cuba freely, despite the fact that the sanctions enforced by the Trump administration that were prior to that lifted by the Obama. And I mean, in the Obama era, people were really going down there a lot and really experiencing the life and seeing that we definitely are less informed about them than they are about us, which of course is also familial,
You were out there, right, Arturo, when the sanctions were lifted? Was
I
that
was,
right?
I got to tell you the story. I was rehearsing a ballet. No, I was rehearsing for The Conversation Continues when there was a hubbub in the crowd, and we were rehearsing in a synagogue, and everybody was going downstairs to see something on TV. And I went downstairs with everybody else, and there was President Raul Castro announcing that things were going to change, and then right after him, President Barack Obama. And it's funny because I I I had to walk away and cry. I mean, I had to, like, 'cause I think of my father. However, I will say this: I most Cubans were a little weary of it. They're like, yeah, they weren't sure if they were going to believe that any of this would take place. And sure enough, here we are, so many years later, and they had good reason to be suspicious.
Yes, hence what I was saying, they're better informed than we are a lot of the time.
There's a question here by another anonymous attendee, or maybe the same anonymous attendee, or maybe that's their name, anonymous attendee. Is there a traditional meal served at Changüí or drinks?
Yeah, well, lots and lots of rum. Well, I mean, right now there's food shortages all over the place, but yeah, back in the day there were many different flans and cakes. There's one of the top La Regina del Quimbombo, which is like like an okra stew, a pork broth. Is served. There's a wonderful changuizera that throws changuizes on her back street, called Lare. They call her the queen of the quimbombo, of the okra stew. So she will have a big bucket of this stew out on her changuizes. Sadly, for obvious reasons, food's quite hard to get right now. So a little has to go an awful long way.
I don't know if attendees have the ability to check the Q&A of other folks, but there's a beautiful post by Catherine Pala that directs us to many great articles about this recording and many great articles about what you've done. Again, Gianluca Tramontana, Changüí, The Sound of Guantánamo, Petaluma Records. Congratulations on this extraordinary project, this very moving and beautiful tribute to the people, the most beautiful people that I can think of. We're going to invite Gabby Sappington to come back and bless us out.
Oh, thank you. Wow.
Well, Thank you both so much. I mean, what a great conversation. There was lots of love coming at you in the Q&A box from attendees who was just saying how fascinating this conversation was, and I can only join them. We will send up the follow-up email, and we will share some of the links as well to the music and also on where to get the box set. And this was fantastic, and it is just a perfect example of, you know, what Gianluca, what you read about Arturo's writing, and it is just so true, and it's something that we at WMI subscribe to as well, is to just share it, and you will get more and more of it. And it is so important to share music, to share cultures, to share the sentiments and the histories, and again, also taking from the conversation continues, and we invite all of you who have been here today to join us in this continued conversation. Sincere thanks to both Gianluca and Arturo, and everybody who was here. We hope you have a great rest of the evening, and that we'll see you again at another WMI Plus at home. Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. Thanks so much.
Thank you.